Okay, it's a great pleasure this afternoon to be talking to Dr. Mike Scott from the University of Aston.
Thank you very much.
Now, Mike, of course, you've got a long history in all sorts of areas, including language teaching, but maybe principally for the purpose of this discussion, we can talk about your experience in building corpus search tools. Could you maybe tell me when you started doing that?
Oof, it goes right back.
It does, doesn't it?
It was an accidental thing, really. I fell into this by accident because I was living in Mexico back in the 1970s.
Now this is going forward.
We're going a long way back, yes. And I bought one of those programmable calculators.
Oh, right.
And we lived near the border with the USA, and I was able to go to the USA, buy a programmable calculator, and then work my way through the manual for it.
Right.
It was real Mickey Mouse stuff, and you kind of typed in things, and then you could program a moon landing, or that came out.
Texas Instruments?
Texas Instruments,
I
yeah.
had a Sinclair Enterprise, which was the British version of that, of course.
Okay. And I read the manual, which I never normally do. You know, I'm not a manual reader at all by nature. But I read the manual of this thing. It had diagrams of trains on tracks and learning to program. The idea was that you'd be programming something that would be running along a track, and it could go round a loop, or it could do all sorts of things and end up making some calculations. And it was just an incidental purchase. I'm not a physicist, and I wasn't really using the calculator very much, for, other than sort of, I don't know, the normal calculations people do with calculators. But it woke my interest a little bit. And then at the university I worked in northern Mexico, they asked all the staff in the humanities to take a course in statistical package for the social sciences.
Oh, right.
And so we had to go to the cafeteria and buy these old-fashioned cards, you know, of Hollerith cards, which you bought in a packet of 100, and then you put one in a kind of typewriter thing, and we were taught to type out the steps you had to do to run this package on the mainframe computer.
And were they punch cards?
They were punch cards, yeah, that's right. And so you type this stuff, and if you didn't, you had to leave 15 spaces at the beginning and then start typing. And if you typed on the 14th space, then throw the card away and do it again. So every single typing mistake cost you a card. And so you kind of typed something, and these were instructions to a big powerful computer which you never really saw, which told it to do something probably pretty Mickey Mouse.
Right.
And then after much struggle, you'd get the thing, because I'm not a typist at all, you'd get the thing typed through, and the cards with their little perforations, and then you'd submit it, and you'd come back the next day or the next week or whenever it was, and you'd be told when it failed on the third step, and you've got to replace the card. And anyway, all of that process. But it was interesting that university thought it a good idea for all of us humanities people to kind of learn how to use computers. This is back in the 1970s. This is before computers became available really for ordinary people.
Yeah.
And then very soon after that, computers did become available, and you could see these ones, Commodore PETs and things, with sort of a ping pong game with a white dot moving across the screen and batting left and right and all that. And I didn't have one.
Right.
But when I went to England in 1982, I bought one of those first computers, and it was Tim Johns who told me what to buy. He said, "Oh, get yourself a new Brain." It was called New Brain, the computer, and it was a very good one. But there was no manual other than the one that came with the thing. There were no books, there were no software, there was nothing to go with it. I bought a computer and the book and a printer.
Right.
And I took it off to Brazil, and where I was living in Brazil, there was no way that there was nobody to learn from, or it was either, oh dear, expensive mistake, put it in the cupboard, or play around with it and try to work out what it could do.
Yeah.
There were some sample program, and there was probably about 150 pages of manual with it. And it was rather a well-produced one, actually. And I worked my way through the book, and there were all these very mysterious things I didn't understand, quite technical things about poking and peeking and God knows what, and they had me perplexed. And then my son was at school, and he said, he came back in the holidays and he said, in our school we've got computers, and when you type, when you get to the end of the line, the thing goes back to the beginning of the next line, so you can type a letter and you don't have to sort of...
No carriage
boom,
return
it just,
all
yes,
the
that's
time,
right,
yes.
and it just shoots right to the left.
Yes.
And I was trying to write a word processor using my, using this really very, very primitive computer. And I taught myself to find a way to get the thing. I thought, oh, the machine won't be quick enough to go round. How can it possibly manage that?
Yes.
And the only way of doing it was by using these arcane instructions. So it was like a bit like the early calculator stuff. But anyway, one thing led to another, and Tim Johns was the chap who told me about buying the computer in the first place, and I struggled with it. And then Tim Johns came out to Brazil again a few years later, and by that time I'd written programs, and but all this just merely as a hobby, just like somebody might be interested in crossword puzzles or Sudokus or skiing or whatever else. I was a sailor, but I also enjoyed doing this thing. And Tim Johns came by and he said, well, I've done a program, and I'd like you to, I've given it to the University of São Paulo and some other universities, and I wonder if you could give support on it for me. So he showed me how it worked, and I didn't know at the time that giving support to somebody else's program is actually quite a difficult thing to do.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And the program has to A, work, and B, occasionally perhaps need some help or fail, but you have to have a knowledgeable person who can say what to do.
And it has to survive the encounter with a user who often does things that you'd never imagine they'd do.
Yeah.
Interestingly, there are so many parallels between your experiences and my own. For me, it was the Sinclair QL that I started programming.
Quantum Leap.
Quantum Leap it was called.
Yeah.
And that's super basic, and started to fiddle around in my last year of my linguistics degree. Started to fiddle around. You got the sense, and by the sound of it, you got the sense that you could do something with language on this that you hadn't been able to do previously.
Yeah.
Apart from anything else, typing on it was much nicer than using a manual typewriter, which used to hurt my fingers.
Well, again, it was this matter of, have you made a mistake? And on a computer, you could go back and correct the mistake.
That's right,
on a piece of paper, on a printer or a typewriter, the mistake would come out.
I remember using a word processor for the first time. It was a package called Quill, and you could buy a spell checker to put into it. And all of a sudden you started to see your spelling errors and the corrections, but you also started to see potentially that you could start to examine this in a little more detail. And I remembered doing a sort of very primitive version of corpus annotation for one of my assignments in my third year, looking at cohesive ties, taking Halliday and Hassan and applying it to a text and actually putting it all in using this markup system within the word processor. And you suddenly thought, you can suddenly do a lot more with these things in terms of studying language than you could have done previously. Anyway, we're in the jungle in Brazil, and you're helping Tim.
Not quite jungle, but yes, that's right. So I had written a word processor, and then I couldn't really give adequate support to Tim Johns' program, which he'd already got. Oxford University Press had already agreed to publish.
Oh, was this Word Cruncher then?
No, it was Micro Concord.
Micro Concord,
It was an early version of Micro Concord. So Tim went back to Birmingham, and the program was supposed to be produced by OUP, but it kept on not coming out. It was always in the catalogue, but not actually coming out. And but it worked. It worked pretty well, but there were some things it didn't quite do right. And I decided to design my own concordancing software to do the same job, but not in any way thinking that this would be a rival to it, but just as almost like a hobby. Yes, that's right. So an experiment. Yeah. So I did this, and I sent Tim a copy, and Tim said, "Oh, good. What we should do now is work together and incorporate the best of both, really."
That's so typical of Tim.
Yes, that's right. Very generous. Yeah. Yes. And we did. We produced the thing together. It was, both of our names were on the product, and eventually, in '93, that came out as a piece of software which Oxford University Press produced, and it was all out there and so on. And it had a concordancer in it.
Yeah. I remember it coming out because at the time I'd just started teaching. I was lecturing. We were using the Longman Mini Concordancer, which was good, but it had huge drawbacks. I think you could get a maximum of about 20 to 30,000 words.
A small amount of text,
memory.
Yeah.
I heard about this new program. I thought, well, that sounds better.
And in those days, of course, we're talking about computer chips that were slow, and the memory was very expensive, and computers didn't have any power really.
No.
I mean, of course, they're still on moon satellites and technology that's out there in space, 70s and 80s stuff with all that low power. That
I think the shuttle ran on that.
Is less than I've got inside my inside my phone.
Yeah.
But yes, indeed. But of course, luckily the technology has kind of leapt forwards all the time, and so what was incredibly difficult, you had to be very careful to not waste too much space and write the program as efficiently as you could, and keep everything compact.
Yeah.
And of course now that doesn't hold anymore, and it's possible to bring in many more possibilities into the software.
Yeah. So what did you move on to after that?
That grew because it was a concordancer, and it didn't have a word listing facility, which I think the Longman Mini Concordancer did have.
It did, yeah.
And there were some obvious things the directions that you should take. And at that time I had a student called Fadila from Malaysia, and she was interested in studying the vocabulary of her textbooks. And what she wanted to know was, is the vocabulary which appears in Unit 2 actually really repeated again in Unit 5 and 6 or 22 or something? Does the poor learner get a chance to practice this vocabulary again? Is there a systematic way in which vocabulary, once presented, gets reused? And the obvious thing to do was to have a word list of Unit 1 and a word list of Unit 2 and so on down the line, as he needed a word listing program. So I said, okay, I'll write you a word listing program, which it wasn't anything for publication. It was just going to be a program for Fadila to use for her master's work. And that eventually kind of built up impetus, and it turned out not to be too difficult to write a word listing program which would know which were the most frequent words and then could show them in alphabetical order. And so there was a need for that, and that matched in nicely with the concordancing possibility. And by '96, that had become Wordsmith Tools. Okay. So I launched the software as version 1 of Wordsmith Tools with Oxford University Press again in 1996, and it had 3 basic functions. It had a concordancer, which was very derived from the work I'd done with Micro Concord, plus a word lister, plus a keywords analysis tool, which was something that I'd again discovered by mistake or by accident. It was there's a bit of a funny story. I'd agreed to give a talk at the university, the way all staff were expected to, so it was my turn to give the talk on Tuesday. And on Saturday morning I started thinking, what am I going to say? And I'd got this word listing program. What I thought was, it would be quite interesting if I tried to take a word list and then relate it to another word list. And I'd got a little word list, and it was racing. It was the racehorses, and it was from the newspaper. It was to do with horse racing and which horses had won races. And I got other word lists that I'd made, including a whole collection of stuff from the Guardian newspaper. My brother worked for the Guardian.
That's good.
And that helped me to get sources of electronic text.
Yeah.
And I, as an experiment on that Saturday morning, I compared a little word list of the one text I had with the collection I'd got. And suddenly I found out that some words were leaping out at me, and there was a comparison to be made, and that was how the keywords. It was using the chi-square statistical calculation, which is a very simple and easy one to understand, and it made the comparison word by word through all the words of the little text, and said, is this word somehow outstanding by comparison to the collection I'd got.
The genesis of it all.
And that's how it started. And so then by Saturday afternoon I realised that I was on to something interesting, but I was getting perplexed because what was happening was words like sunshine or star were coming out as key or coming out as prominent in this list because they were names of racehorses. Now the text wasn't about stars or sunshine at all. It wasn't the weather. But I realised that there had to be certain thresholds. So a word had to come more than once, for example, and this idea of what would count as being outstanding was a sort of problem.
It is. Well, that's a lovely little vignette from history, the birth of keywords. And of course, many of the issues you outline are still issues that are with us today. What do you count? How frequent is frequent enough?
Yeah.
What measure do you use to decide whether something's worth looking at and is indeed key? So, yes, it's interesting actually how often when an idea is born, it's born with all of its problems.
And the problems go on.
The
problems don't get solved effectively.
Yeah, well, I certainly remember Wordsmith coming out because I think we had you come up here to talk about it quite soon afterwards because we immediately adopted it into teaching. And as I think you know, I think it's programs exactly like that which actually help popularise corpus linguistics because prior to that it was very difficult to do a lot of the things that you wanted to do. So certainly in the early 90s to mid-90s here, when we wanted to do things like build word lists, we'd write a program to do it, run it on the mainframe, get the answer out. Whereas all of a sudden with word list, colleagues, word list for instance saying Wordsmith and keywords, especially Wordsmith, colleagues, maybe like even Norman Fairclough here, suddenly started to think, actually this is within reach of mortals. I could get someone to do this, or I could do it too.
Because not everybody knows how to write a computer program.
Or can find and tame a computer programmer. Whereas you were the sort of publicly accessible computer.
Well, my model of this was this student of mine, Fadila, who was a master's level student. So she was wanting to get on with her work, but really she was a language teacher. She wasn't really into computer science in any way. She just needed word lists to be able to get on with what she needed to be able to do. And the model of somebody going to a laboratory where there were white-coated technicians and air-conditioned machines, as was the case still back in those days, that didn't suit. I mean, for people in a high-powered situation, then you'd have very specialised computers and very specialised resources. And this was, my idea was always for the master's level student, the PhD student, for somebody who wants to have a crack at it, but doesn't want to go into a big lab and sign up and
turn themselves into a computer scientist.
Exactly,
Well, I wonder whether one issue you might have encountered, because it was an issue I encountered, was the issue of scale. Some solutions that worked when you were working with smaller corpora, as larger corpora came along, suddenly that algorithm or way in which you derived the word list wasn't efficient enough anymore. Did you experience any of that? I know I did.
Well, in the earliest days, of course, you were dealing with very small amounts of text. The size of corpora started to grow, and impressions that people would form on the basis of 20,000 words of text, which at some point way back in the 1990s was considered
enough
a corpus for something. I mean, in a way, there's the whole issue of specialised corpora, isn't there? There's never going to be any more Sumerian text that will be produced because it's a dead language. So that whole issue is quite a complicated one, and it has grown with time. And now, of course, we've got billions of word corpora with billions of words. The Wordsmith isn't really designed for such huge things. It's designed for something, in a way, in the millions, in the tens or hundreds of millions. That's all.
But it's interesting that even over the last 15 years, say, you'll have had to change some things, I dare say, because initially you might have been dealing with people who might have 40,000 to 1 million words, and now routinely, just by grabbing newspaper text, they might go at you with 10 million words or something like that.
What I think has caught me more in that time, there has been this scale change, and that has been important, but what has been more important to me is the multi-word nature of language. So I think that back in the 1990s we were thinking, or I think I was thinking anyway, very much that a word was a word, and I knew that I knew about lexicography. A word wasn't necessarily to be either a sheep or a goat. It was either a function word or a lexical word, but that it could play both roles at once, and I had some understanding of that. But I think very much the focus was on individual words like mug or table or graceful or six or because. These are words that we wanted to understand and find out how they worked, and then we'd look further, and then you'd find words where it was the company they were keeping. And of course now collocation has grown out of all of that, and collocation was still very much a gleam in somebody's eye, in a way. Obviously it goes right back many decades, but at the same time, back I think in the early 90s, I don't think the power of collocation was as visible as it is now.
I'd certainly agree with you on that.
And then the multi-word unit starting to come out.
It did start to come out.
And all the work with n-grams and skipgrams and all compgrams and all these different things
and it was around that time that Renouf and Sinclair started about collocational frameworks, which actually were also a variety of multi-word unit when you look at them, sort of with fixed elements in the variable slot fillers. So yes, there was definitely a lot in the air around collocation.
I think that was all in the air, but it was very difficult, and it still is very difficult to study, because all that early work of Sinclair did the crucial work way back, showing that if you look beyond about 4 words to the left and right of the word you're interested in, you will get so many words coming up that you will lose the patterning that you suspect must be there, because of all the noise of millions of kind of essentially unrelated words coming into the bucket that you're looking at, into the frame. But at the same time, there must actually be relationships between words that are quite a long way away from each other.
And you can find famous examples of that in literature especially. So in terms of other challenges then, we mentioned the contact with users before, and one of the great things about your program is over the years you've been extremely responsive to people writing to you saying, have you thought of adding this, or there's a bug there, would you fix that? Have there been notable developments generated in your software over time by using Mango?
Enormously so, because basically back in the 1990s I kind of imagined that I would know what people might want, and that was quite wrong. For example, in a word list I assumed that you would want the word list to be capitalized, and that why would you want to have a word list which distinguished between the with a capital T and the without a capital T? Well, somebody who's studying sentence relations might well be wishing to look into all sorts of things where they would use capitalization. So I'd have people writing to me and saying, why does your word list
take the capitalization
away? Why does it sort of damage the text in a way? Can you please put in a switch so that we could have that optional? And I'd get people writing in who were students of other languages other than English, of course. So I mean, a major preoccupation I had was always, let's see if we can make it possible to allow pretty well any language to be studied. So that means don't build into the software any knowledge of English.
Right.
Although I might be in a position to find out enough things about English to do that. I wouldn't be in a position to find out things about Lithuanian and Polish and Farsi and so on. There's no way that could be done. So let's keep it language neutral.
So provide and don't preclude, I might say.
Provide and don't preclude, and allow for when people write in and say, well, I'm actually looking at the poetry of the Middle Ages in Greece or something, and please can you allow for that fact, because it has this implication. So they would write to me and say, this is what I'm doing. I say, oh, how interesting, tell me more. And then sometimes I would be able to say, yes, I think I can probably accommodate that, and sometimes I have to say, no, I'm afraid that would get it too specialised and I can't do it. But mostly I would like, because basically a hobby.
Yes.
I would like the whole thing started out as an accidental thing, a hobby.
So you're happy to do it?
If people said, can it be done, it's a challenge, and I'd like to meet that challenge and see, well, I'm bloody well going to try and make it, do it.
Well, I have a memory, and it might be one of those unreliable memories, memories, but I remember when you came up to talk to us about Wordsmith, around that time, I was very interested in the question of dispersion and the work of Alphonse Jouillon, and we had a chat about it. And to my cheery delight, sometime later, you did these dispersion plots in Wordsmith. So I thought that was just wonderful.
Well, it's a wonderful idea, and I wasn't aware of it. And then there is this possibility. Can it be done? Is there something in the design of the software which makes that impossible? Sometimes the way you've set out the whole design of the structure of the machinery means that you can't do it. But often the machinery will permit it if you actually think your way through it. So it's a problem-solving little puzzle to do. Can it be done? Now, will it be useful? Well, it depends on the user, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The plotting facility that I've put into Wordsmith with the keywords and the concordance plotting is only, I think, useful on some occasions to some people.
Yeah.
And that's typical of many of the resources. I expect there are people who never look at the collocates, perhaps, or
who knows,
who don't find that interesting or challenging or useful for their research.
But on dispersion plots, only last Friday, somebody who was quite new to corpus linguistics was looking at something with me, and they said, "Oh, but what if all of those examples are just from one text?" Dispersion plot, nicely dispersed across the corpus, and they were delighted. They were pleased that this wasn't some type of invalidation.
That's interesting you mentioned that, because that's another thing that I had to bring in, and I think probably this millennium, the notion of how many texts is this true of?
Yes.
Because you might say this is very interesting, but it's really only in a tiny cluster of text that we find this phenomenon. And the rest of the time, either it's not there or it's quite different, behaves very differently. And so there's an extra column that came in where, how many texts is this? So that came into the word listing tool, for example.
It's very handy. It's very handy. So, where do you think the future is for corpus searching tools? If you had your life over again, and rest assured, Mike, if I could give you it over again, I would wave my wand and you'd have it. But if you could have your life over again and you had another 100 years to work on this topic, where would you be taking it?
I think the one certain thing we'd know is that it's not possible to predict it. That seems to me to be fairly safe. Because if you go back 100 years and you say you've got somebody who's just invented the motor car or some of these early technologies, and then you can't really imagine the problems of urban transport and motorways getting clogged up, and it's difficult to go back into the head of somebody in 1920 or 1913 in this particular case, and have them imagine what our world is like now. And I think in 100 years' time, goodness knows what people will be doing. But I think I'm very lucky, because having been in at the beginning, at the beginning of this kind of corpus linguistics, done on computers that you can hold in your hand or have in a room without having a technician with you. I think I've been pretty lucky to have got in, and as a complete amateur, sort of on this self-taught basis. That I don't think that would be easy to get in at all as an amateur now, perhaps.
No, I can see that.
Probably one could. But in 100 years' time, I wonder whether it'll all be kind of, you will need qualifications to be able to get in.
Yes.
Perhaps.
But I would guess then that your engine for the future would probably be individuals using the data and coming forward with ideas for things that they think need doing.
Yes. Well, it could not be that. Yeah. I also think that half of all of those dimensions of text which we aren't looking at the moment, because we don't really have the means of doing it well. Sound, the accompanying sound, the smell, all the
visuals,
all the visuals, the if you like, the equations in the mathematical part of it, the captions below pictures and all that sort of stuff. There's lots of stuff which we're losing because we're looking at plain text still. I think that is certain to come in. But how it will work and how many corpora we will have, like the TED conferences, where you can have the video and the
Yeah.
transcript, which we already can get. That's just beginning, and I think that will be in the very near future will be concordancing them. With Wordsmith, you can do it already in a simple sort of way. I could imagine that growing enormously.
I see that. Well, I think you're right. It was an enormous privilege to have been around anywhere near the start of it. Apart from anything else, one of the nice things was everything was novel. Every time you wrote a little program to do X that somebody hadn't written, it was absolutely new and you were seeing it for the first time. Whereas nowadays, a lot of those things have become banal in a technical sense, and they're so easily derived. They're everywhere. Word lists, things like that. It's difficult to at times think back to the excitement that you get from seeing a word list for the first time from 1 million or 10 million words or something. So
suddenly realising that half of the ideas that we had about how language works were half-baked or were based on some sort of supposition, perhaps from some person with a long grey beard.
Yes.
And they turned out not really to be very true at all. People being so sure, and I remember as a language teacher I was so sure. At the age of 25 I was absolutely sure what was right and what wasn't right. And now you Google the thing that I would have said, no, that's not English, and you find lots of examples of it. Yeah.
Well, I always tell my students they're not going to get it right, but they may get it more right than the person that has done it previously. And that's really what the development of human knowledge is about. So incremental baby steps towards something that may be right. But I agree with you, certainly the most scandalous claims about correctness have been made with great assuredness by some people, but actually the better route to take is the one of humility, where you say, this is my best estimate at this, help me, find out where it's wrong, and we'll push it forward.
Corpus tools give you a chance to, they don't give you a chance really to prove anything very much, but they do give you a chance to examine a lot more data and then feel more confident in saying, well, the claim that was made earlier is actually not very well founded or needs to be modified in some way or other.
Oh yeah, and there are wonderful sorts of falsification as well. You know, I think certainly in one of my books I've looked at certain sentence types that Chomsky said could never occur. You find them. You find them very quickly. Short search on the word. Oh, there's one. And it's perfectly fine. Nobody fell over when that sentence was written or spoken. And it's just there. So they're powerful tools for falsification as well. Well, it's been great chatting to you, Mike.
Good.
And hope to see you again before too long.
Yeah.